Hello everyone, my name is John, and it is wonderful to have you here with me in my library today. Today I wanted to talk about comic books and have a little fun doing so. I'm inspired by the likes of Michael K. Vaughan and Steve Donahue, who over on their channels, they talk about comic books every Wednesday in what's called Epic Comic Book Wednesday. I always have a lot of fun watching whatever they do every week. I watch all of their videos and thoroughly enjoy all of them, but they have a lot of fun doing that as well, and I enjoy that immensely. And coincidentally, today is also Wednesday, though I am not associated with either of those two gentlemen. But I wanted to talk about comic books too, and I suppose today is just as good as any other day to do so. Today I wanted to talk about Superman, the Man of Steel, which is written by John Byrne, with other stories in here in this volume by Marv Wolfman and Jerry Ordway, and among others. Now, this is a DC oversized hardcover edition. It's very nice, good quality. I enjoy owning this. There are technically 4 volumes to this set, and I've got them right here. Volume 2. For some reason, after the first volume has a spine that's colored blue, and the rest of them have a spine that's colored orange. Not sure why, but that's how they decided to do it. See, like I said, all 4 volumes, and I have all 4. The first 3, I believe, are pretty easy to find these days for, relatively inexpensively as far as these things go. But Volume 4, I don't think that they did a wide release on, and I was lucky to get it as cheap as I did. I think at this point, they tend to be quite pricey. But the way that they publish these things and republish these things, things like this come back around. So definitely don't go forking out hundreds of dollars for any of these books. They will absolutely come back around at some point in the future. Anyway, so the Man of Steel, well, what is it? These 4 volumes represent probably, I think, 2 years of Superman comic books. Everything published about Superman between, I believe, the years 1986 and 1988, unless I'm mistaken, but I think that's correct. Or at least a part of 1988. This was an interesting time in the Superman mythos. I think, as some people, I reckon it could be best understood. There's a lot of complex comic book history going on right here in the mid '80s, but I think it may be best understood by comparing it to Star Trek a little bit. In the 1960s, you've got Star Trek: The Original Series. In the 1980s, late 80s, you've got Star Trek: The Next Generation. And the idea of The Next Generation is to revitalize the franchise and get new faces and new fans of the series, kind of refresh the Star Trek formula for a new generation. And I think you have to do that for any franchise that's going to run for a long period of time. And Superman and DC Comics are no different. Superman's been around since 1938, and he's been published every month since then. Those are thousands and thousands of Superman stories. Often he has more than one comic book title for the enormous majority of his history. It's been at least 2 a month. Oftentimes more. In the 90s, there was 5 titles that were being run concurrently, so that way you had at least one Superman book to read every week. Of course, they were comic books, so they were only 20 to 25 pages, but this is with the artwork and everything that went into it, that's an insane amount of storytelling for these characters. And so I think it comes natural that every once in a while, you're going to want to refresh the brand. And DC was wanting to do that with a lot of their characters in the mid-'80s. And so they had an event in 1985 called Crisis on Infinite Earths. And in that story, there was a bad guy called the Anti-Monitor. And he destroys the multiverse, and in a few worlds that remain, somehow are compressed into one timeline, and it renews the timeline. And Superman, among some of the other characters, have kind of rebooted origin stories and renewed continuities. They're kind of unshackled from the past. And Superman had become shackled in the past in many ways, even though a lot of what they had done was wonderfully expansive to his mythology. The story of Superman being an alien orphan, who is sent to Earth from a dying homeworld and landing in Kansas. I believe that a lot of DC editorial felt that, especially in the from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, eventually that there became a lot of stories that revolved around, Superman has a super dog from Krypton named Krypto, and he's got a super cousin, Supergirl, which is Supergirl, and he's got a super horse and a super monkey, and he's got a whole city, a miniaturized city called Kandor, and there's lots of teeny little Kryptonians running around. And so I think the story started to feel a little muddled, at least to some. And I think this expands the lore of Superman a lot. But a lot of people began to feel like this was just becoming too much. And so they said, well, what if we stripped all that away? We put him back to basics. In 1938, there was no Kandor. There was no Supergirl. You had Jimmy. You had Lois Lane. You had Perry White. You had the cast and crew from you had the crew of the Daily Planet, originally called Daily Star, but Daily Planet. And that's who you focused on. And so they said, okay, let's do that. And in Crisis on Infinite Earths, Supergirl died. And then in the compression of the world, she vanished and was never talked about. And they rebooted the origin story. And that made up the first 6 issues. So the Man of Steel is technically a 6-issue miniseries that came out in 1986 that retold the origin for the 1980s. It's a great 6-issue miniseries. It details. I think it takes a lot of inspiration from the 1978 Superman the movie with Christopher Reeve. I think it takes a lot of inspiration from that, and it refreshes the story. It one thing it does differently from all other versions of the past is it keeps Ma and Pa Kent, Jonathan and Martha, alive. In previous iterations, both parents had been dead by the time Superman becomes Superman and joins the Daily Planet staff. And I think in a lot of ways that helped to ground Clark Kent and Superman in his human side. I think it makes a lot of sense that an alien baby who lands on planet Earth when he's a baby and is raised by loving parents would identify more so with planet Earth than he would his native planet of Krypton. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think having parents who are alive allows him to do that. Others have said that they feel as if having him at least lose Pa, like Superman in the movie, having him lose Pa kind of gives him motivation. But I honestly don't agree. I don't think Superman is driven by loss. It's okay if one or the other has passed away. That doesn't bother me at all. I think that's a fine way to start. But Superman's driven by love, and I don't think that he's necessarily driven like Batman by the loss of one of his two parents. Anyway, so it does that. It establishes that he was raised and his parents are still alive. It establishes the Daily Planet staff, whereas before in the 70s he had actually been a news anchor. So it takes him back to the Daily Planet, where he had, in this version of the timeline, he had never been a news anchor before. And it introduces Lex Luthor in a new light. Previously, he had been a mad scientist, was how he was portrayed. And even in Superman the movie, you can see that, where instead of owning a business or corporation, he is, he's buying up real estate to blow up the West Coast and have all this sort of new oceanfront property, kind of a mad scientist kind of scheme. So it reimagined him as a evil businessman. I think a lot of those changes were very positive. I think where the Man of Steel doesn't do it for me is in doing all of this. I think a lot of the ideas that they had going into it made a lot of sense. Making Superman the last survivor of Krypton, bringing him back to basics, all that's fine. But in doing so, they stripped away what made Krypton interesting. They had Krypton become a cold, sterile environment instead of one where science had advanced itself. Even Jor-El and Lara, his Kryptonian parents, were cold and distant. And at the end of the series, Superman is looking out, and he says that he had a vision of Jor-El, or hologram, I should say. It was a real hologram that downloaded all of the information about Krypton into Superman's head, or Clark Kent's head, and learning about his Kryptonian heritage for the first time. And he goes away to think about it, and the conclusion that he reaches, and this is in the last pages of this miniseries, the conclusion that he reaches is that none of his Kryptonian heritage really excuse me, none of his Kryptonian heritage really means that much to him. And again, I think I understand that he would feel a little bit more tied to his humanity than he does his Kryptonian heritage, but I find it utterly strange. And even later in the books, as John Byrne takes the Superman character from the miniseries and continues on throughout the regular monthly titles, there was another issue, and I don't recall exactly where he's comparing his Kryptonian parents, and he's comparing his Earth parents, and he says, well, Jor-El and Lara may have given me life, but Jonathan and Martha gave me love. And I thought, well, Clark, what would you call putting your baby in a spaceship to save him from planetary destruction and sending him off to planet Earth? What do you call, like Moses, a baby in the basket to save his life? What do you call that if not love? And so I found it utterly strange that John Byrne would want to, with DC editorial telling him to lean into his last son of Krypton kind of self, that he would make him utterly uninterested in his Kryptonian heritage. That's just a head scratcher for me. That, and again, as these comic books are continuing past this original 6 issues miniseries, the times where they try to reintroduce Supergirl and Krypton, but they're not wanting to do it like they did in the 60s and 70s. Sometimes they just don't work. The idea that they introduce in the later issues of these volumes, that Supergirl is not Superman's cousin. She is a alien protoplasm, shape-shifting alien protoplasm from another dimension. Some of it just doesn't make any sense anymore. Why would, if we're getting rid of Supergirl, if she died during Crisis on Infinite Earths and she no longer exists in this timeline, why are we making her an alien protoplasm just 2 years after we did away with her? That just doesn't make any sense to me. But as I said, so these 4 volumes do collect the entirety of John Byrne's tenure on the Superman titles. That lasted about 2 years. He did the 6-issue miniseries, and then he started with a new Superman #1 title. So he started fresh. He retold the origin and just went from there. And at this period in time, there were actually 3 Superman books that were coming out, and the first of these is Superman, which he started with issue 1, and that is his main Superman adventure book. I mean, he's going to fight an alien or a monster or something like that, a supervillain. He'll fight Lex Luthor or one of his classic rogues galleries, and it'll be a good smash-up time. There was also The Adventures of Superman, which was more so headed up by Jerry Ordway, I believe, Marv Wolfman, which really is more of a Metropolis book. It focuses on the supporting cast more. It has less of a giant scale and scope. It tends to focus more so on day-to-day sort of issues. In these books, it focuses primarily a lot on gang violence and things like that. And so that's probably my favorite. The Adventures of Superman. Actually, I think it hits a lot of points right. It keeps Superman local. And then the last title that they were publishing at the time was Action Comics, which is where Superman originally appeared way back in 1938 when his first appearance was in Action Comics. And Action Comics was, for the most part, throughout its history, kind of a book that had just a sampling of all sorts of stories. But Superman was generally always the leading man, the head of all of these stories, the featured #1 story. But at this period of time, they changed that up, and it was more so like a Superman team-up title. He would team up with another member of the DC universe, which was okay. There were some issues that were more standout than others. Ultimately, I think that DC had John Byrne doing too much work, and I think you could probably tell that in some of these issues. So anyway, all 4 of these books are great. I enjoyed reading them. They're a lot of fun. They take Superman back to the beginning. They take him back to the basics. The 6-issue miniseries to start it off, called The Man of Steel, is great, and then the larger John Byrne tenure that lasted about 2 years, also collected in these books, it is good as well. I think, as others have said, that the books get substantially better when John Byrne leaves, and you start in the Superman exile and the Triangle era sort of things that take place after these 4 volumes. I think you get Superman coming out a little bit more balanced. That and Lois Lane's portrayal is another thing that John Byrne portrays her very hard edged, and in many cases sometimes hard to sympathize with. But after he leaves and after new faces come in and work on the books, I think that they make her a little bit more sympathetic, a little bit more caring, and someone who you could see Clark Kent end up having romance with. Anyway, I suppose I've yammered on long enough about some of these books. I hope some of my insane ramblings made some sense. I worry that sometimes I sound like a crazy person, especially since it's a little bit later in the evening and I'm not feeling super great. But I wanted to get in here and just talk about some of these books, and I hope you enjoyed. I hope that maybe they provided a little insight, or just a little something to listen to while you're going about your day. I always appreciate all of you that watch, and I hope to be back very soon. I'm working on that Julius Caesar video. That is intended to be a longer, in-depth video, so that will be sometime this month. It'll be a little bit more than me just turning on the camera, as you can tell I've done, and talking about random books from my shelf. But I hope that you have found some enjoyment in this, and I thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you all very soon. Thank you.